Hey everyone, today I'm joined by Valoze. He was an undercover ATF agent. He helped take down a lot of serious people. He even helped take down a Chicago outfit member, and this member so happened to be a part of the family secrets trial. And the Chicago outfit is the Mafia in Chicago. Lou also helped take down biker gangs and LA gangs. After Lou retired, he decided he was going to become an author. He wrote a book about his life story and his experiences as an undercover agent. But now we're going to get into this interview. Please don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't hit subscribe already. I'm going to have plenty more interviews like this coming. So without further ado, let's get into Lou's story. Thanks for coming on, Lou.
Doing great, man. Thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you taking out some time and coming on, man.
You got it.
So what we can do now is talk about your early life. What was it like before, getting into law enforcement?
I had no plans of getting into law enforcement. I grew up pretty standard life, Italian family. I was an athlete, a couple brothers, and no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I ended up getting a football scholarship to a school in college in Pennsylvania, Lafayette College, Division I AA school. And I went there. I played football, got a degree in business and economics, and really didn't have any interest in either business or economics, to be honest with you. And I was just kind of lost in the world when I graduated, and working at a bank, making nothing. And I had a chance meeting with the brother of a guy I played ball with in college in the Bronx. And he happened to be, I'd never met him before. He was a DEA agent, and he had just gotten back from Panama. He was an undercover guy. And he sat down and we talked about his job and stuff, just had a beer. And about 30 minutes into it, I was sold, man. I found what I wanted to do with my life. I had just graduated. I was 21 years old. And, I knew I didn't want to work in a bank. And when I heard this guy and his stories and what he did, I said, man, that's what I want to do. So that's a direction I took in my life. It wasn't something for me to get into law enforcement. I knew I didn't want to wear a uniform. I didn't want to cut my hair. I didn't want that part of it. I wanted to be an undercover agent. So I started taking all the tests for all the agencies, every alphabet letter agency out there, man. I took the test for, and things were very different back then. There was you weren't going online to do nothing. You were mailing stuff in, and I took a bunch of the tests, even though I really wasn't qualified for most of the jobs because you needed a 4-year degree and you needed 3 years investigative work, and that's not like a uniform cop, so that's a detective, like 3 years. So I happened to score really high on one of the tests, and it was for the Immigration and Naturalization Service for a special agent job, which is now ICE. And they called me up and said, "Hey, come on out for an interview." I had scored high enough that they could defer those 3 years investigative experience requirements.
Wow.
So they flew. I flew out to LA. I'd never been there before, and downtown, and went. And I, tucked all my long hair back in my suit, and went through the interview. Really, I mean, I was clueless, man. I was a kid, but I answered everything honestly, and they called me back a week later and said, "Hey, pending your successful background investigation, we'd like to hire you as a special agent with INS in Los Angeles." And that was it. But that was the beginning of it.
Damn. So did you have to make the move from wherever you're at? You just moved out to LA?
Yeah, I was in New York, and so I went out to LA, and then back, and then down to Georgia. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center is down there in Georgia, where most agencies train. And I went through all that training, and I'd never even held a gun in my life. Never shot a gun, never held a gun. So I went through all that, and then I had to go through the Spanish immersion and that portion of it, and got out to LA. This was This was in 1991, and they threw you to the dogs, man. It was a super exciting time to be in law enforcement in Los Angeles. The gang situation had, I mean, it was blowing up like nowhere else in the country. MS-13 was already there. No one even knew who they were at that time. All the Central American gangs were hitting the streets. The Los Angeles gangs, the American gangs, they didn't know what to do with themselves because they had never seen violence at this level before. The MS-13 and these a lot of these Mexican gangs, they were coming in, they were chopping people's heads off, man, literally.
Jeez.
And so it was crazy. And what they did with us is they put us at LA Central at the jail for your first 6 months, and you sat there and you conducted interviews on every single foreign-born inmate that was being released on the release line. And in LA, that's probably 75%. The inmates are foreign-born, and you were interviewing them to determine alienage and deportability, and put them into the system to be deported. And but what we were able to do is we were gaining intelligence and information on these gangbangers, man. And that's where I first learned. That's when I was found myself sitting at a table right across from these guys, staring into the eyes of cold-blooded killers, some bad dudes. Again, I'd never heard of MS-13. I didn't know what they were,
Yeah.
but I learned real quick. All
Yeah.
the 18th Street gang, Florencia Trace, it was all. I mean, these gangs they were just doing some bad stuff. They were moving dope, guns and extortion, you name it, they were doing it. And so that kind of got our feet wet. And then after that, they kicked us out in the street, and we were in gang task forces. Then the riots happened right after that, and I worked the streets during the riots, and it's where I learned how to be a cop.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That city
Happened.
burned for 4 days, man. 4 days
Jeez.
it burned to the ground. It was wild. It was like being in a war. Crazy.
So were
Um,
people? Were you undercover, or what was
no,
going on? You were in uniform and everything, and so when people would see you, would they kind of disrespect you or something because all the riots were going on?
no. I mean, we had our tactical gear on during the riots, but my normal course, I was a special agent. I was a plainclothes agent at the time. For the riots, we geared up in our tactical gear. And it was wild. But my normal course of job I was on. I got on a task force, LAPD and ATF and INS task force in Rampart, which is a notorious area in Los Angeles, and
Hmm.
that's when I first got to work with the ATF guys, and that's when I realized that that's where I wanted to land. Those were
Yeah.
the guys who were working undercover. For me, there was no undercover opportunity with INS. The only guys doing undercover work were the Hispanic guys. So when I saw the ATF guys, and I was like, man, these are some cool dudes, right? These are the guys, even LAPD guys look up to these guys, right? They give them respect. They were always in the middle of everything, man. Always in the action, because wherever there were guns, the ATF guys were sniffing around. And so I knew that eventually I wanted to get over there. Again, you don't just it's not realistic that you just sign up and you start working undercover.
Right.
You got to pay your dues first. So it took me about 7 years. I did 5 years on the streets of LA with INS. Then I jumped over to the U.S. Marshals, and I worked 2 years in New York with the Marshals, New York and Puerto Rico. And I was chasing fugitives. It was a great gig. I loved it, but again, there was no undercover opportunity. All the while, I was just waiting for ATF to open up because had a hiring freeze for years during the '90s, and when they finally hired, I put in 1997, and I got hired in 1998. by ATF, and they sent me down to Georgia.
Oh, so that's where you were doing a lot of your work. What was some of your first work that you did with ATF that you remember?
Yeah, I started working undercover immediately, like literally my first day on the job. My partner was an undercover guy, kind of like a legend, down here in Georgia, and he was running the streets, man. He had informants. He was working the gangs. He was working out in the country. He'd work in the city. Um, he had a great set of informants, and so he said, "Man, you're going to work undercover, man. I got you." And he had his informant introduce me to some convicted felon who was trying to sell some guns. My first day, and it was my first undercover deal, and it was in the bathroom of a fast food restaurant, Crystal's. I don't know if you Crystal's is like a burger joint down south, kind of like a White Castle
Okay, yeah,
deal.
I know what you.
And I met this dude. He was a huge dude, and the informant made the introduction. The informant left, and so the guy said, "Hey, man, follow me." And he walked into the bathroom. Now this is the bathroom. It's lunchtime at a fast food restaurant, and we walk in. He shuts the door. There's a sink. There's a urinal, and there's a stall. With a shitter.
Hmm.
And he walks in. He goes, "Come on." He walks into the shitter. He goes, "Come on in here." And so I go in there. He shuts the door and latches it. And now we're right here. We're face to face, right? So now I'm thinking to myself, man, maybe I haven't made very wise choices here on my first undercover deal, right? Because I know a gun's going to be in the picture, right? Because it's a
Yeah,
gun deal. I said, so if he's got bad intentions, I've just limited my options. Uh,
yeah,
so he reaches in his waistband and pulls a gun out, but he was there to sell it.
yeah.
Maybe I don't know if maybe he didn't want to try me if it was going to be a rip or what it was, but he pulled it out, and I didn't even try and negotiate the price or go down. I gave him the money. He gave me the gun. And then I didn't know afterward. We're walking out of the bathroom. I didn't know what the protocol was. Were we supposed to sit down and break bread, or I just went to the exit door and left. And I got in my car and I was driving. I radioed in that everything was fine, and because you never know if your equipment's working, right?
Right.
So on that drive back to the meet spot, to meet the cover team, I had the gun I had just bought. And I remember that feeling, man, that rush I had. It was one of the greatest feelings I'd ever had in my life. I
Wow.
just took this crime gun off the street, from this bad dude.
Hmm.
And I was hooked, man. That was my high right there that I chased for 2 decades after that. And,
Yeah. Did
and
they?
that's how I started. That's how I got my feet wet with those kind of small time gun and drug buys.
Yeah. What was the protocol like after you left? Did they go and bust him, or how would they do that when you were doing these kind of things?
You know, it was always different. Every case is always unique. Depending on if he's part of an organization or what it was, usually we would make the buy and they would be arrested down the road.
Hmm.
Um, First you want to get the information from that gun before you do anything, right? Because you want to find out, is it a stolen gun? You want to trace the gun. What's the history of the gun? You want to run it through not the NIBIN program. Is this gun linked to any shootings anywhere? So usually the takedown would occur at a point later on. Maybe we want to do some more deals with him. Is this guy putting a lot of guns on the street? Does he have a big stash? Is he selling a bunch of dope as well? So the it was very rare for me to do a buy bust where I would, unless it was like a home invasion scenario or something, where I would actually make a gun buy and the bad guy would be taken down right in front of me right there.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of makes more sense because you want to build up a case and see what they're connected with. Yeah. No, okay. See what other crimes and stuff. So after that, when did they kind of start letting you, do some bigger cases and bigger dealings?
Well, it's almost a matter of not even them letting you, but you have to kind of get in the network first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no one's going to ask you after you've done a couple, you know, you bought a few 8 balls and a couple guns. They're not going to ask you to come infiltrate, an outlaw motorcycle gang, right? You got to prove yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
you got to get a resume kind of first. So, I probably did those kind of cases for maybe a year and a half. I was making them bigger and bigger, and we were starting to work into some gangs and that kind of stuff until I got asked to do my first outlaw motorcycle gang case. And that was kind of a fluke, um, me getting asked to do it, because the only reason that I was asked to do it was they had to pull the one undercover out. He was a task force guy. He was on with the sheriff's department up in the Atlanta area. And as soon as they had gotten invited to go to Bike Week in Daytona, and things were getting real serious, sheriff's department pulled him out. They said, "Hey, man, we're not, we weren't trying to get into all this." So the guy who was the primary undercover guy, ATF agent, he needed another agent to go in with him. And I was the only other agent at the time in the Atlanta Field Division who had a motorcycle license on my undercover license. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I got asked, basically. Sometimes you luck into these things.
Right.
And and I knew nothing. I was totally unqualified. I knew nothing about outlaw motorcycle gangs um, at all. I could barely ride a motorcycle. Couldn't, I dumped the Harley the first day. The government Harley, I dumped it. The first day I got on it and rode it, I dumped. I went down. So it was, kind of a fluke again, but I learned a lot during
Mm-hmm.
that case. I kept my mouth shut. I watched them and I learned.
Yeah. So when with this case in particular, what was it? Just taking down some biker guy, or?
It was the outlaw motorcycle gang.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're real. They're big in Chicago. They're real big in the southeast, and they're always at war with the Hell's Angels. The outlaws and the Hell's Angels, and yeah, it was just an infiltration into the Atlanta chapter, and buying guns and buying drugs off these guys, hanging out with them, at their place all the time. Uh, I mean, it's actually it's not really glamorous, like it sounds like it would be, but it's not. It's dirty and nasty, to be honest with you. Long hours, unhealthy. Uh, the case, after about 7 or 8 months, and everything was real good. That case got cut short because they beat our informant's brains in with lead pipes.
Jeez.
So yeah, so that case ended a little bit early, but that was like my first foray into a long-term infiltration.
So did they, with the informant, did they get word that that's what he was? That.
No, no, it was. I mean, that just happens with these guys all the time. He had pissed them off, and then he showed up at their clubhouse late at night with a gun, which you don't do, waving a gun around, and so they beat his brains in.
Damn.
And again, I mean, fist fights and beatings. I mean, that's a weekly occurrence with these guys.
Right. Yeah. Was So I think I remember hearing on an interview as well that you had some dealings with like the Ku Klux Klan. Did you?
So during that case, we were up north in the North Georgia mountains, and we were at a this like a kind of I guess a roadhouse kind of bar, you would call it, and
Mm-hmm.
the outlaws, man, these guys, like, they didn't they did what they wanted to do, and they didn't really give a shit who you were. You know what I mean? They didn't take shit off anyone, and they went in. They were always the big dog, and we were sitting at a table, and there was about 4 or 5 other guys at a table, a couple tables away, and man, these were some creepy looking dudes, man, big creepy looking dudes, and there was kind of a weird dynamic I could tell in between the outlaws and us at our table and that table. But no one was talking shit or saying anything, but you could feel it. You could feel it in the air. And about halfway into the meal, while we were in there and we're having beers, and I pulled aside one of the outlaw guys. I said, "Hey man, what's the deal with those rough looking fuckers over there at that table?" I said, "I can tell something's weird." And he goes, "Man, that's a clan. Those are clan." And it was kind of a weird thing because the outlaws weren't really fucking with them like they would do with people regularly. And, they weren't really fucking with the outlaws either, but I could tell there was tension there. And, that was the first time I'd ever seen, anyone in the clan or anything like that. And I could tell they didn't like each other, but they weren't going to fuck with each other,
Mm-hmm. So, with them, they were just, with that, I didn't even really know that they were pretty active like that. I mean, are they still active as they were back in the day? The
No,
Ku Klux Klan? No, not at
no,
all. So they,
no.
who kind of helped wipe them out? Did you ever do anything with them, or?
No, a lot of guys I work with, not so much the clan. The clan hasn't been relevant, in decades.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the gangs out there now they all come from prison, right? That's where the gangs start,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not so much a racial thing as it is a survival thing, right? Basically, if you're white, black, Hispanic, or Asian, and you go to prison, you're going to join up with your own kind for protection, or you're not. You got a good chance of not making it. So, if you go in prison, you're white. If you don't line up with the AB, with the Aryan Brotherhood, right? I mean, you're out there, man. Your chances of getting raped and beaten and all that and killed are pretty high, right? Same, if you're black, same if you're Hispanic or Asian, you're going to go with one of those under one of those gangs, and then what happens is those gangs that it spills out, into the streets. And they actually run, a lot of these gangs are actually run from the shot callers who are in prison.
Really?
Yeah. The
Wow.
gangster disciples, the Latin Kings, the Aryan Brotherhood, a lot of them they're run from prison. That's who's giving the orders.
Damn. So
Yeah.
how come you think it's structured like that to take orders from someone, say in prison?
Because usually the leaders, if you will, those are the ones who get jammed up and get the longest prison sentences. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where they are, and so they don't give up power in there. They hold on to that power, and they issue their orders. They know what's going out in the street. All that information comes to them, and they're
Mm-hmm.
putting out the orders, man. They're putting out the hits if they need people taken out. They're still putting out what routes who's doing, and it's all about running dope or whatever their game is, and they're making the shots from prison.
Yeah. So how long were you in Georgia because you ended up in Chicago, right? Was that after Georgia?
I was in Chicago for about a year, but so I was based in Georgia since '98. I worked
Oh,
all over the country on cases,
hmm.
and then I eventually ended up working for the Undercover branch out of headquarters. But it was one of those gigs where you could live wherever you want. You were just going to bounce around doing undercover cases wherever they took you.
Hmm. And was there any cases where you would get close to someone and yeah, I mean, how would you get close to them? That's what I'm wondering, with these people.
The same way you get close to anyone, man, you spend time with them, right? You get
Yeah.
an introduction, you put yourself in a position, to be around them, and then you do it the old-fashioned way, man. You put your time in with them, and if you're talking about that whole burn thing when you've spent a lot of time, sometimes years, with these people, and then for you're doing it for one reason, because you're going to betray them in the end, right? So it's a pretty shitty thing from a human standpoint. Like when you step back and look at it, you are the ultimate betrayer. You are buddying up. You're being friendly. You're getting to know someone. You're sharing information about yourself, even though it's probably false. They're sharing information about themselves. You're creating a bond, right? Establishing rapport. You're making a relationship, all so that you can burn them in the end.
Yeah, that's true.
So if you don't feel a little bit shitty about that, right? If you even, they're bad people and they're doing bad things, but if you don't feel a little bit shitty about that, if that doesn't weigh on your conscience a little bit, then I don't think you should be doing the job. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because then you're what do they call it? Narcissist.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You don't have any
Any
sympathy
morals?
or
Nothing.
whatever. Yeah.
Did you ever, feel sympathy for, or get really close with someone and, feel bad about, betraying them or anything?
Yeah, it happened on multiple occasions. There was a guy that I hired during one of our storefront operations. Um, he had already sold us. It was the very beginning of the operation. We had a fake business, and we were just dealing with a lot of gangsters in the area who were selling guns, who were selling drugs, and this guy was introduced to us by his girlfriend, who was selling us pills, and he sold us a bunch of cocaine. He had multiple felony convictions, so we really didn't even have to deal with him anymore. He had already bought himself 20 years. And she came to us and she said, "Hey, he really needs," his name was Petey. "Petey needs a job as a condition of his parole. He's got to be employed. Could he work here for you guys?" And we were like, "Shit, it's an undercover operation." We're thinking, so it's hard to bring in a civilian, especially a civilian who's going to be a defendant, right? A future defendant,
Right.
because there's a cover team right in the next room, and there's all that going on, and you got to keep everything a secret. That means you can never come out of role if no one's in there with the other undercover guys. If we got this guy in there, but it presented such opportunities because he was instant credibility for us. Everyone knew him in the area. So if he was sitting there, if he was working the register, sitting behind the counter with us, it gave us instant credibility with most of the other guys out there in the street. So we hired him. And I didn't think it would last long anyway. We were this was probably about 11-month operation. We were about 2 months into it. It was kind of a little bit of a slow start. He ended up working there every day for the next 9 months to the end of the operation. And we spent every day with him. We became friends with him.
Yeah.
We got to know him. Even the guys in the cover team who were listening to everything ended up liking him, and they felt bad. One day he told us, he was a black guy. He told us, he says, "Man, listen, you're the first white people I ever trusted in my life, man." And, we knew a couple of months later, he's going to prison, man. He's going to find out who we really were.
Mm-hmm.
And, what a shitty feeling, man. Because it was rare that it got that personal. I would buy guns off someone. I would buy a bunch of dope, some kilos, some guns, whatever it was usually, and deal with them only in that setting. But this was one of the first times, 8 hours a day, I'm with this guy, right? We're talking about life, love, problems, the whole deal. So it really started hitting home to me and the undercovers toward the end. We're like, man, we're going to wrap this operation up, and we all move on to the next operation or whatever. And Petey's going to prison for 20 years. And I'm telling you, man, it was hard. It was hard on all of us. We even tried to get them not to charge him, but that wasn't happening. And he was taken down. He got taken down before the big takedown. There was about 100 defendants in this case. They took him out first, put him in the same jail that all the others were going to the next day, which was a big mistake. Because, now they find out we're undercovers. They've seen him with us every day. They think he's obviously they're going to think he's a rat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he tried to commit suicide, man. He tied up his bed sheets, tried to hang himself, and
Damn.
unsuccessfully, thankfully. But he's actually getting out at the end of this year. He's been in for about 17 years now.
Damn. So that
Yeah.
was way, way back then when you were kind of starting out.
Well, that was 2000 and about 2007, I think.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, I guess.
2007.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I'm sure that's definitely a hard feeling. When you get so close to these people, and then you got to put them away. I mean, but you like with that case. I mean, that was one where you actually did get pretty close, and
Yeah,
things happen like that, and especially 9 months. That's working for you guys. Not even knowing that he was working. So yeah, it's got to probably be definitely a hard pill to swallow for everyone.
it is, man. You meet their family. These people, they have friends. I mean, again, I'm not excusing their criminality at all. I mean,
Yeah, no,
you're
no, I
putting
know.
guns on the street. You shouldn't. Obviously,
Right.
you're breaking laws. But you see that other side of them too. Some of them are good fathers, right? They're good husbands, they're good friends, whatever it may be. And so you're doing the worst thing you can possibly do to someone, right? You're taking their freedom from them. That's the worst thing you can do to somebody, right? I'd rather you kill me than take my freedom away.
Yeah.
So it really is the ultimate betrayal. And
Mhm.
it weighs heavy on your conscience.
Yeah, because time's something you don't get back. You know what I mean?
Damn right. Yep.
So, what was your operation? That you had with the Chicago outfit, and taking one of the members down. Was it just one member, or one instance being there
Yep.
as well?
So I was just a piece in this big operation. So it was ATF and FBI working. I think it was called Family Secrets was the name of it.
Yeah.
So the part I was working was it was the Mike Sarno was the boss. Big Mike, they called him, and one of his guys was the guy that I was working on, and he had done. His name is Mark Polchan. If you want to Google him, because he just made the paper again. He got 60 years, but they found some technicality and they just knocked it down to 30, which, I mean, still, I can't even imagine, right? Because
Right.
he was in his early 40s when I did this. So even 30 is pretty much a life sentence.
70s come out when you're 70 years old. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
if you come out, right?
right. Yeah.
So what he had done that had gotten him on the radar, so the first thing was he was a patched member of the Outlaws motorcycle
hmm So, what is
gang.
patched actually? If you can explain that.
So he was a one percenter. I mean, he was a full member. He wore the patch, on his cut,
Mm-hmm.
the Outlaws, and he was also a member of the outfit, Mike Sarno's family there. So it was the first time they had seen these two entities working together. The Italian mafia was actually using the bikers to do a lot of their dirty work, to do hits, bombings, all sorts of stuff. So in this case, it had revolved around the video poker machines that they put in the stores and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The outfit was putting those into the stores, and they didn't really. If they told you they were putting them in your store, they weren't really asking you. You know what I mean? They were telling you.
Right.
Uh, and I guess it revolved around one. There was one guy with these video poker machines who refused to play ball, and so they bombed this place. And it was this guy. It was under Sarno. It was Polchain. So they were trying to get into this guy. He was not a convicted felon. He was very smart. They had made run after run at this guy to set him up, and he sniffed everyone out. The FBI had sent 3 people in to try and get him. 2 of them were dirty cops who were his childhood friends he had grown up with, and he sniffed them all out, man. I mean, he was sharp. So I got sent in on this dude cold, no informant, nothing, just cold. He had a jewelry store in Cicero, which was just a total front. He had several layers to even get in, and in the back he was meeting with every gang in Chicago, like the gangster disciples, the outlaws, the mafia, every street gang, and he was moving all sorts of stolen equipment through there, flat screen TVs, you name it. He was every crime you can think of. Home invasions, armed robberies, burglaries. It was all being they were all being set up there. They were hitting the 18 wheelers, right? Like if an 18 wheeler was full of flat screens on its way to Best Buy, the driver would stop, walk out of the truck, they jump in and take it. It was all set up that way. And so actually, my mission was to get in good enough with him that he would start selling me this stuff because they were having trouble. They needed to pin all this stolen stuff back to the actual shipments. You know what I mean? And it's not like a gun. A gun is very easy to trace. But televisions, even with the serial numbers and the lot numbers, are very difficult to trace back to what truck took them and what shipment, where they were headed, and all that. So they needed to start buying this stuff, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, man. I just showed up cold at his store, and he didn't want nothing to do with me. My role was I was like kind of an over the hill MMA fighter, training at a gym out there because he was really into the fighting and all that. And so I actually had to go out there and train at a gym and do all that shit. And so I eventually became friends with this guy. The fighting angle really worked. And it came to a point where he took me out on his birthday. I didn't even realize it was his 40th birthday. And we were at a strip joint in Chicago, and he's buying shots and all that. And he tells me, he goes, listen, man, I can't even trust the people around me anymore. He goes, I can't trust anyone around me, the people I grew up with. I knew who he was talking about, right? I knew he was talking about those guys the FBI sent him. He goes, man, I just want to thank you, for, being here. He goes, it's my birthday. And man, I remember feeling like shit, thinking, man, boy, you picked the wrong person to trust, buddy. Like, bad move, man. And again, I had met his kids and the whole deal. I spent a lot of time with them. Once I had kind of completed my assignment and done everything they wanted me to do with this guy, and that we had enough charges on him, they asked me to bring him into a hotel room at the Chicago airport. And he thought he was going to meet Hoist Gracie, the famous jiu-jitsu guy. But he was really meeting a bunch of ATF and FBI agents in a room with all boxes of evidence that we had on him. And he showed up with his son. It was terrible. And then he wouldn't believe that I was an undercover agent. So I had to go in there while they were talking to him. They made me go in there and show him my badge. And I've told this before, but I told him, I said, listen, man, I just want you to know that I'm doing my job, man. This was business. It wasn't personal. And he hadn't really said a word up to that point. And he stopped and he goes, don't tell me this isn't personal. He said, you've met my family. You met my friends. He goes, I brought you in my circle. He said, everything you've told me up to this point has been a fucking lie. He said, so don't tell me this isn't personal. And I didn't know what to say, right? I mean, he was right. So yeah, in that, like, cases like that, it gets tough. But then, you always just balance that out with, I mean, this dude, he planted bombs. So, and that's the biggest cowardly act you can do, because, what if a kid or someone, happens to be in a crossfire, right? So you always balance it out with, the real bad acts these people are doing, or we wouldn't be trying to infiltrate them. You know what I mean? But there's still that human side to it, man.
Yeah, no, and I think that, like what you said earlier, it really makes sense to, have that human feeling if you're going to be doing the job, because, I mean, it's just, it's a it's not. I mean, necessarily a shitty thing, but I mean, it's like you have to balance out. Okay, well, this guy's blowing people up and killing this and that and giving drugs to all these people. So there's a reason you're doing it. But then as a human, you get close and that and then it messes with your head. But I guess is that one thing that you've always kind of been able to overcome. I mean, by being able to balance things out. I mean, but obviously it still kind of messes with you, right? Even when you do even try to balance it out, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was the part of undercover that I didn't enjoy. But
Hmm.
again, I'm not crying about it. It's no one put a gun to my head and told me I had to work undercover.
Right.
It's purely voluntary. And not only did I decide to do it, but I decided to do it over and over and over again, nonstop.
Yeah.
So, obviously it didn't bother me bad enough to stop because I kept doing it.
Hmm.
But it was one of those things that kind of built up in me.
Hmm.
And, kind of toward the end, looking back, it's like, man, shit. It's betrayal is betrayal, no matter what.
Yeah. So did you? So when was the point where you're ready to get out of the ATF and just because you're retired now, right?
Yeah, I've been retired for about 5 years now.
Hmm. So did you just was it with COVID and you just ready to get out, or what was the situation on that? I suppose.
So my career, not unlike some of the other guys I worked with as well, uh, my career crashed
Hmm.
toward the end. The bottom line is that I did it for too long. The smart guys do it, you get a couple real good cases and get out. I didn't do that. I became obsessed with it. And because of that, I became a little bit more of my undercover persona than I was me. And I was bringing that home when I was home, which wasn't often. Um, now I was a husband, I was a father, uh, but living the life of a gangster, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
though, I can tell you this, looking back now, to be a good undercover, you have to be a selfish person because the bottom line is while you're undercover, every decision you make is about you first and
Hmm.
your job first. So you you cannot be a great family person, family man, and a great undercover. They are mutually exclusive, those two things. So the better I got as an undercover agent, as an infiltrator, the worse I became as a husband and a father. It led to me losing my priorities because there's nothing more important than your family.
Right.
And,
It's true.
I had this belief that the most important thing to me was my next case. That was always the most important thing. It was going to be bigger and better than the last one, right? If I had locked up 65 defendants federally on this operation, I was going to get 75 on the next. Um, if I had gotten 250 crime guns off the street on this operation, I was going for 300 on the next case, and that became my priority. And so living that fast paced lifestyle, playing that role, of a hustler and a gangster, led me to lose my priorities as a family guy, and, as a husband, as a father. Um, it led to, neglect of my family, infidelity, and that ultimately kind of destroyed my career in the end. So I tell you what, man, I crossed the finish line of my career on my hands and knees crawling over the finish line. And it took me years to kind of straighten my life back out. And I'll always be playing catch up, you know, personally now. That's just the toll it took on me,
Yeah.
and the price I paid, for living that lifestyle, man.
Yeah. No, I mean, you don't really, it's not really out there, about the effects of, the undercover agent, what they go through and, what they,
Yeah.
what their family suffers through. I mean, kind of with Donnie Brasco. I mean, kind of showed that, him and his. I don't know if you ever seen that movie where he infiltrated the mafia, but that kind of showed it. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's it's definitely a tough thing, and it kind of almost sounds like, even like with you, kind of almost became like an addiction to where you just want more and more, and
Yep.
eventually kind of crashed, and then now you're retired and stuff, so I'm sure you got more time and stuff to you did the book now, and I'm sure, what is your kids older and stuff now?
Yeah. My kids are 17 and 16 now, and but I, I've been retired for 5 years, and I've been like I said, making up lost time.
Yeah,
You can never get some of those games you didn't go to back and the recitals and all that, but I'm doing my best now. So
yeah,
everything's great now. And again, I don't want to make it like everything I did was voluntary. I volunteered to work undercover, right?
yeah,
So
right,
again, no one forced me. This is just how it affected me and what happened. And I've talked to so many of the other undercover guys and girls that I work with, and they all say the same thing. They say, "Man, we're living in a house of cards. After doing this for decades, man,
yeah,
just pull one of those cards out and it all comes down." So,
wow,
most of the guys who do it long term, divorced, married, divorced, married, child payments. It's almost like a cliche, financial ruin. Just so it really, even though we're doing what we love, there's a toll that it takes on you for sure.
yeah. And so you said that what you'd kind of recommend if someone wanted to get into the undercover life, get a few big undercover cases and then pull out. I mean, what would you recommend to someone?
Well, so I've talked about that on a couple other shows with a guy, Jay Dobbins, a guy who I worked with,
Hmm.
who wrote a great book called No Angel. By the way, if your listeners are into cool undercover books, he infiltrated that. He was the first guy to infiltrate the Hell's Angels
Oh,
and get a patch. And it's like Jay says, the problem with that is once you've done a couple big cases and you've been doing it for 5 or 6 years or 7, like you're at the top of your game, and like it's almost a shame to get out. You know what I
mhm.
mean? And that's how
Yeah,
I
yeah.
felt.
Hmm.
And now you're getting out and you're wasting that expertise that you've built up. So, but my advice to anyone who wants to do it is if you're going to do that, stay single, don't have kids, don't get married, don't have people dependent on you in your private life. If that's what you want to do, do it. If you can do it and get it out of your system and then move on,
Yeah.
and have that family life.
Yeah, because then when you have no obligations, you don't have to worry about not being there and hurting the people that you aren't there for.
That's right.
Because I mean, even when you do it, I mean, you don't really think. I mean, you're doing a service to everyone, by putting bad guys away. So you think you're doing good, so it makes up for the lost time. But then, even in all reality, I mean, it's like, okay, you're not there, so it's, I don't know, it
Yeah.
just never, it seems to add up. You know what I mean? Like it don't make up for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, your kids, all they know is you're not there. They
Yeah.
don't know what you're doing, right? There's
Right.
no one giving you trophies or medals.
Right.
You know, and so
Yeah.
there's no really because of the secretive nature of the job. I mean, there's no glory. It's not like you're not like a soldier coming home from war. When you finish a 3-year infiltration and you're wiped out, you don't come home to any trumpets or fanfare, man. It's move on to the next one, man.
Yeah.
And
Well,
but again, I don't say that like it's all voluntary, man. But man, that's just the reality of it.
yeah. So where can the people find your book? I mean, obviously I'll put a link in the description, but if they want to go and
Yeah,
find
the,
it on their
the
own.
best place is Amazon. Just go
Okay.
straight to Amazon and Google storefront Sting,
Okay.
and you can pick it up. And hopefully, in the near future, you'll be able to turn on one of your channels, HBO, Netflix, or something. You'll be able to watch the series because, like we were talking about earlier, before we went on air, it's my book was optioned. It was picked up by a big Hollywood company, uh, LBI, is their name, and they are going to be making a series out of it.
That's awesome. That
Geared,
you. Oh, go ahead.
it's going to be geared toward HBO
Yeah.
or Prime or Netflix or.
Yeah, that's awesome that, I mean, all of your stuff that you went through, you got to write a book about it. And, now that they're finally going to pick it up and hopefully be on the shows here soon. So that's awesome that, you were able to, go through all this stuff, and now it's going to, maybe come to the big screen. Like you said, it's just kind of in the works, right?
Man, it's so they're basing it around these kind of fake businesses that we would open up,
Right.
and then we would find out where these problem areas, these problem cities, where the guns were just falling out of the trees, and the shootings and home invasions and all that, and we would go into these communities to make a difference, right? We were targeting the trigger pullers. We were targeting the guys who were putting the deadly poison out in the street, the fentanyl, the heroin, and we were targeting the guys putting the guns on the street. And we would do these year-long operations undercover, and kind of learn from each one and up our game in the next one, where we went from very street level stuff at the beginning, a tattoo shop we did, to by the end, we were taking down major criminal organizations. We were setting up, I was a freight forwarder by the end, by the port, and we were doing international shipments, and we were into Bolivian gun smugglers and huge stolen car rings all up and down the eastern coast. So there
Wow.
was kind of evolution of these things, and
Yeah.
a lot of mistakes, a lot of successes, a lot of failures. It was a wild ride, and each one is kind of tailor made to being a different season in a like Netflix type series.
Yeah. Well, see, that'd be awesome. I mean, and then they got you, I mean, maybe they even give you a role or something, but you'll probably definitely be an advisor, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's part of my contract. I'll be a consultant, but
That's
you
good.
won't be seeing my ugly face on TV, man.
They'll have
Hopefully,
they'll have some
I,
young stud.
yeah, someone cooler than me. Hopefully, will be playing me. Yeah. So,
Oh man, well, no, that'd be cool. So definitely, you guys keep an eye out for that. And you can definitely come on my show again too, and we can promote that. When that comes out. So I do appreciate you coming on and taking an hour out of your day and coming chopping it up with me and talking about your story, man.
all right, I'll make this promise to you. The day that it's official that it's going to be a HBO series or a Netflix series, reach out to me. I'll come back on, and we'll talk about it when the
Hell
first
yeah,
episode comes out. All right.
yeah, hell yeah. That sounds good to me, man.
All right, brother.
Alrighty, man. Oh, yeah. Well, what'd you think? He's got a really interesting story. He's been through a lot. Please comment a key takeaway that you got from this video. Please hit subscribe. I got plenty more interviews like this coming. Lou also has a book. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check it out or buy it. Also, I'll put a playlist at the end of this video so you can watch more of my interviews about the Mafia and true crime. Lou is also going to be in the documentary that I've been working on. So please hit subscribe if you want to be the first to get that when it comes out. The documentary is going to be a documentary series. Each episode is going to be about a different crime family, how they started, who the bosses were, what was their downfall, and ultimately where they are today. Also, one more thing I wanted to bring up was I appreciate everyone using the communities tab and voting on certain subjects that I talk about. A lot of them are about the Mafia because a lot of my subscribers are really into that right now. I appreciate everyone interacting with that. So thank you. I appreciate what you all do for me.